Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. This is Ausra DeVerge. I'm the office manager here at SF Advanced Health. A couple logistical notes before we begin. We have taken the measure to mute everyone. Please ensure to maintain muting yourself to minimize disruptions. Please ensure your video is turned off to save system bandwidth. As you have questions, please use the chat feature to ask the questions. We will monitor them throughout. We will have extensive time for Q&A at the end of the talk. It is my honor to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Payal Bhandari. Dr. Bhandari is a leading practitioner of integrative and functional medicine and the founder of SF Advanced Health. She combines traditional Western and Eastern medicine with a strong background in nutrition, Ayurveda, stress, and sleep management. Dr. Bhandari specializes in the digestive, immune, and endocrine systems. She incorporates the best scientifically proven strategies to understand the root cause of illness. Typically, her patients have worked with many subspecialists and are at their wits' end, going from doctor to doctor without any significant reversal of their disease. Dr. Bhandari delivers personalized medicine and helps restore patients' health effectively. Please welcome Dr. Bhandari.
Thank you, Ausra, for a wonderful introduction. Thank you all for joining us today on our conversation about how not to get sick with coronavirus. We've all been hearing a great deal about COVID-19 coronavirus and how we can decrease the spread by social isolation and hand sanitizing. But what we haven't heard a great deal about is where exactly did this virus originate? How is this pandemic happening? And how can we prevent from getting sick if we are exposed to this virus? As a practicing clinician for over 20 years, I have spent my career looking for the root cause of disease and how to treat it completely. My compliant patients have near 100% success rate in the reversal of any disease. Please be patient with me as I take you on my journey of understanding the whys. Why has this infection occurred? Have we learned from history because we've seen these episodes before? And why is it that humans currently have less resistance for infections? We will be discussing this evening what history has taught us from the last pandemic, SARS, coronavirus, the source of COVID-19 coronavirus, the germ theory of disease, antibiotics' role and impact, the origin of germs, and how to stay well. It has been known for hundreds of years that coronavirus just causes mild respiratory symptoms, which we call the cold. And we've known that it can cause severe cases of gastroenteritis in animals, such as birds, cows, pigs, cats, and dogs. But we never really thought about it for humans as causing a big problem. Well, when coronavirus SARS became an epidemic in November of 2002 to July of 2003, it was relatively contained in China, Hong Kong, Vietnam, with, some sparing cases seen in the United States and different parts of Europe. But because the United States only had 8 people test positive for SARS, we really didn't make much of it and make a big deal out of it. What we learned from SARS is that it initially began in a few different provinces in China. It occurred to people who directly dealt with wild animals or animals that were just recently slaughtered and being set to the market. It impacted people who directly touched the animals, to touch the meats, to prepare the meats, like the chefs in restaurants, to the people who then ate the meats. And when someone became sick, they would suddenly develop high fevers. And if they had a pre-existing condition, which really was tipping over their immune system, then they may actually get pretty significant pneumonia or even respiratory distress. So what we found was that the sources were actually coming from the wet markets. And so through SARS, we developed testing that either is blood or through taking a nasal swab, which, the blood test is an antibody test, where basically if your immune system is strong enough, you will generate antibodies that fight that virus. And so those antibodies can be present even after you become well. But if you have a very immune compromised system, then you may not have the ability to actually generate antibodies, even though you have been infected with coronavirus. With the PCR test, it's a swab that's taken in the back of your throat, your nose, your saliva, and it actually looks for a very specific genetic material of that specific virus. That test will turn positive when you have a high enough virulent strain. So if you have enough of the viral load where you're sick enough, then the test will turn positive. But a PCR test will not turn positive if you don't have symptoms, or if you're really early on, you haven't really developed enough of a viral load. And so you can have a false negative. If you're already done being sick, then your test will be negative. So the testing is not 100% proof in telling you, are you infected or are you not? So SARS really taught us a lot about the actual source of the coronavirus. And the reason that it got contained was that the countries that were hit really quickly isolated people very quickly. And so anyways, that leads us to understanding COVID-19 coronavirus. And what we found is that, we'll come back to this actually, before I even talk about COVID-19 coronavirus, I think the biggest thing I want to acknowledge right now is that before we learn about the origin, we have to acknowledge that each one of us is scared. Our fear is our #1 driver of infection and illness. Fear triggers our fight or flight response, where our sympathetic nervous system shuts down our immune system, causes us to shallow breathe, our blood doesn't get adequately oxygenated, and our body goes to war. If a person is often under a state of distress, where they're scared, they're panicked, their body eventually does not know the difference between who their friends are and who their enemies are. The 3 main causes of fear are, #1, not receiving information. If a person does not receive the information they want or need in order to be well informed, they begin to worry about what they don't know or what is being kept from them. They may even suspect that their trusted sources or their leaders may not have a grasp on the situation. When these leaders do not communicate early, people fill in the blank with fear or rumors. Now, this is dangerous. The second main cause of fear is not trusting the information received. When our trusted source or leaders have lost their credibility, anything they say will be questioned. Our leaders need to speak cautiously, truthfully, because if what they have said in the spirit of providing comfort is eventually discredited, it actually builds our fear. The third main cause of fear is the information received is frightening. Sometimes leaders and our trusted sources must tell people information which scares or upsets them. It is important to be careful how we speak, to be empathetic, for us to feel their compassion and to understand. This is a time where we all need to really understand, why has this pandemic happened? Are these things going to happen again and again? Are more people going to become very ill? I am going to take you on my journey of all the whys that I have been asking, to really learn from what history has taught me, to now understand the epidemic we're in and how we are going to move from the I in illness, the I of isolation that the world is communicating to us, to eventually the we in wellness, the we in community. And as we learned from SARS that started in the wet markets of China, well, COVID-19 also began in the wet markets of Wuhan, China. Well, I had to ask myself, I don't even know what a wet market is, because this is not a common word used in the United States. Well, the image on your top left is a wet market in Sevilla, Spain. The image on the right, the fish market, is from Chinatown, New York City. The images on the right is the meat market in Wuhan, China, and then the live chickens that are sold there. A wet food market is a place where fresh meat, fish, eggs, dairy products, and other perishable goods are sold by local producers at an affordable price. In some countries, such as in East Asia, Latin America, Europe, United States, Canada, you may even find live animals that may be slaughtered and dressed somewhere close to the premise or even within the premise of the market, so maybe not visible to the customers. Locals absolutely love these wet markets, and they are extremely popular throughout the world because people believe that the fresher the meat, the better the quality and the taste. People also believe that rather than refrigerating their meat or fish for a long period, it is best to buy it and prepare it immediately. And so the locals love the trusted relationship which they have with their local vendors. Those of low socioeconomics also appreciate the affordable price of the foods and that they can actually buy ready-made street vendor food. So governments truly foster these markets because they are a center of community and they are a great tourist attraction. These markets are called wet markets because the floors are often wet from the continuously melting ice to keep the meat and fish fresh. The stall holders often spray the floors with water to keep them clean. Unfortunately, these markets are built with very little consideration of food safety and environmental health. There is no monitoring or regulation of the hazards, especially of the raw animal protein that is sold, such as what happens during production, harvest, and storage when animals are exposed to industrial hazards, such as heavy metals, lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, radionuclides, polyphenols, or chemicals from agriculture, such as fertilizers, pesticides, drugs given in animal husbandry, or even marine toxins. It has been clearly shown that wet markets are a huge primary source for foodborne diseases. The CDC has estimated that 1 in 3 people in the United States alone develops a foodborne disease every year. This may stem from a mild case of gastroenteritis to a low-lying chronic infection that eventually presents as cancer, autoimmune disease, heart disease, pneumonia, respiratory collapse. Well, what does this infected meats and products look like? Because we really actually make an assumption that it's really clean, and we have no idea what's really on a microscopic level. So when you look at actually the red meat, it often has pus in it, but it's usually sold where you cut off the piece that doesn't look very appetizing. So you would never know. When you look at fish, the infected parts are just removed and you cut off the head. So you don't know when you actually look at it. And the other thing is oftentimes people don't even see the actual meat or the fish. They may only see it in a cooked form, like when it's fried or baked in the oven. So that foul, disgusting smell, how would you even know? It's already been masked. Eggs. The eggs you see here are infected with salmonella. I don't know if many of us are experts in knowing if when you look at the egg, is it infected or not? One important catch is that if you've ever noticed in the United States, eggs are sold in the refrigerated section of the grocery store, and it's always refrigerated. Well, historically, eggs, they actually were kept at room temperature, and so because they weren't infected. And so there must be something about eggs going bad very quickly that we refrigerate them because they have a high probability of having pathogens. Milk. We all believe that milk is the color white. But honestly, in today's world, all milk in all the countries has pus and blood in it because we have a huge epidemic of mastitis in our dairy industry. Mastitis is inflammation, infection of the breast tissue. Cows oftentimes go through an extreme amount of misery when they're getting constantly milked, and so their nipples become inflamed and then infected. And you're supposed to actually discard the infected milk because you really don't want to have, that pus cells in your milk. But unfortunately, demand for milk throughout the world and its products is so high that the dairy industry has heavily lobbied all governments to actually increase its maximum required of pus cells in milk. So all countries allow millions of pus cells per liter of milk. And some have zero regulations like Australia or China. In the United States, you're allowed 750 million pus cells per liter of milk. Now, if you had normal breast milk that's delivered from a cow, just like the breast milk delivered from a woman to the baby, it does not have any white blood cells in it naturally. It's not infected. But in today's world, essentially, milk is not what you think it is. Organic is even worse because in organic farming, the cows are not given antibiotics, but unfortunately, they cannot control for disease. So there's even a much higher pus count. Now, people are under the assumption that when you pasteurize the milk, you're going to kill all the organisms. But unfortunately, pasteurization was not meant to kill all the organisms. It kills all the ones that die through heat. But you have plenty of bacteria that are heat resistant. And so they continue to be present in the milk. They are part of the bad bugs that we don't want a lot of in our system. So they do cause a great deal of havoc for the cows and other animals. What we've learned, though, is that what we're experiencing today, this did not exist thousands of years ago. We have to ask ourselves why, because humans have not evolved genetically that dramatically. So what changed? Because people have been consuming meats and fish and milk and eggs for like 20,000 years. We domesticated animals, back in 1800 BC. But early on, people learned that, one, they didn't consume it that much, because even when you look back in the Old Testament, in the Bible, it said, be careful about consuming animals with hooves. And so early on, people did not have the level of consumption that they do now. One, it wasn't available. Two, it's too expensive. Only the wealthy aristocrats had access to these things. So the level of consumption was pretty minimal on a daily basis. But over time, what people learned was those who consumed those items got sick. And so people kind of learned how to deal with that. And so that led, in the late Middle Ages, which is around the 1660s, the concept of the germ theory of disease. But this theory was not widely accepted until the end of 1880s. And it is currently now the most well-accepted scientific theory for germs causing pretty much all disease. Germs are these pathogens, which we believe are bacteria, viruses, fungi, protists, parasites, which invade humans, other animals, and plants, and then begin to grow, reproduce, and cause disease. We now know that environmental and hereditary factors greatly influence a potential host's susceptibility to becoming infected and the severity of their disease. The germ theory has led to improved sanitation, pasteurization, antibiotic development, and the birth of the pharmaceutical industry. It has led to a dramatic reduction in global morbidity and mortality due to bacterial infections. It has also led to a dramatic increase in global pandemic antibiotic-resistant infections and chronic disease. The germ theory led to the invention of the first antibiotic, penicillin, in 1928 by Alexander Fleming. Fleming learned how to market penicillin for widespread commercial use. Antibiotics were extremely beneficial during wartime. This led to governments investing heavily in research and funding for antibiotic development. We had the golden era of antibiotic development between 1950 to 1960, where 50% of the most commonly used drugs today were invented then. But what we found was that within 2 to 3 years of a new antibiotic being introduced, we had quickly developed antibiotic-resistant pathogens. So then, after 1960, pretty much all the drug research and development was about finding drugs to deal with these antibiotic-resistant pathogens and all the chronic diseases that were caused by these pathogens. And so here's the situation. We have a problem where we overuse our antibiotics. And so we got all these bugs who don't really get killed by the antibiotics. And then we got all these other diseases that are caused by these pathogens. So what do? We spend millions to billions of dollars on trying to deal with all the diseases and the pathogens, but we never go back to the beginning that we basically overuse antibiotics. For instance, in 2015, the United States alone produced 17,500 tons of antibiotics, of which 82% was for farm animals, 10% for therapeutic human, and 9% for pets. Why do we give so many antibiotics to animals? The reality is that the conditions the animals are in are so awful that they are prone to illness. And so we basically prophylactically give pretty much animals antibiotics to deal with the stressful conditions that makes them really sick and fires off their sympathetic nervous system, so their immune system is shut down, to the potential outbreaks that are probably going to happen, to the fact that they are getting sick, so you better give them a bunch of antibiotics before they get shipped off to transportation to get slaughtered or wherever they're going to go. And so even if you think, well, this is a grass-fed cow, or this is a pasture-raised egg, or I'm sorry to tell you that at some point they're going to get antibiotics because you've got to. This is an industry. So to support the demand that customers want, you're going to keep increasing production. And so antibiotic resistance has led to animals carrying harmful bacteria in their intestines, which makes them really sick. And that leads to their poop basically contaminating our soils, seeping into our waterways and going and traveling really far. And that even gets into our oceans. So our oceans are full of antibiotic resistant pathogens and all these antibiotics. It leads to their eggs being contaminated. It leads to the milk being, contaminated. And then when you have the actual meat or fish, it's really full of pathogens. So when people eat these resistant infections from their food source, like their chicken or their steak or their fish or their glass of milk or their crackers and cheese or their scrambled eggs, well, it doesn't make them feel good. But they may not know that, because when they eat it, they're like, oh, this is so amazing. And then later on, they're like, I don't feel so good. But they may not have put the two and two connections together. The CDC has actually found that 1 in 5 resistant infections are caused by germs, which then leads to, pretty significant health problems. And they are stemming directly from the food that people eat when they have animal products. What we found is that instead of trying to address the problem by decreasing our antibiotic production and how much we're using it and coming up with better solutions, we actually, as a world, are saying we're just going to use a lot more antibiotics. Because people want these products, we're going to produce them. So back in 2010, China was using 15,000 tons of antibiotics a year. It is projected that in 10 years, 2030, China will be using almost 35,000 tons of antibiotics. So no wonder this epidemic started in Wuhan, China, but it is not spreading in Wuhan, China, because they use a ton of antibiotics. The United States is number 2. They use at least 10,000 tons of antibiotics a year and will continue just increasing. Brazil is just a little bit less. Germany, India, Spain, Russia, Italy, Mexico, and the list goes on. All the countries use a ton of antibiotics. So the source is not coming from one place. It really is. When you go and you get your fresh meat and fish, or you got to have your milk products, you got to know you don't see it for the way you want to see it. You got to start seeing it beyond that. That is where the pathogens are. And they don't just get killed when you cook them all. Because part of the challenges is that some of these microorganisms come to life when the meat is thawed, when it's been sitting in the fridge for some time, you know, they do stay alive. They don't all get killed. It has actually been noted that the deaths attributable to antibiotic-resistant pathogens is going to keep increasing every year. That by 2050, so in 30 years from now, 317,000 people will die annually just in North America. Almost 400,000 will die in Europe and 400,000 in Latin America. 4 million people will die in Africa. Almost 5 million will die in Asia. This is completely preventable. It has everything to do with what people are blindly wanting to consume and not taking regard of really what is that journey that has happened where these antibiotic-resistant microorganisms are taking over, right? We can't fight them because they're not necessarily our enemy. It's what we're doing with our antibiotics. So what we're going to do is go back, not just in the last few hundreds of years where we've seen these pandemics. We're going to go back to billions of years because man was not always plagued with these type of infections and chronic diseases. You know, for years, people lived for a long time and they really didn't get these kind of illnesses. So we've got to go back to understand why. So we're going to go back to billions and billions of years ago when bacteria were the only living organisms on Earth. Bacteria learned to develop chlorophyll so that they could do photosynthesis and take the energy from the sun to create food and release oxygen gas. So over like millions of years, bacteria kept replicating and reproducing because they could make their own food. And the oxygen they produced was precipitating into the oceans. And eventually the oceans got really full of oxygen so that oxygen could escape into the air. Till one day, the Earth's atmosphere was 21% oxygen, and that created our ozone layer. The ozone layer is our protective shield that protects our Earth's surface from the dangerous ultraviolet rays of the sun. So when this beautiful transformation happened, we could have new life. And so the bacteria eventually was able to evolve to protists like algae, plants, and fungi. Well, protists and plants both have chlorophyll, which allows them to do photosynthesis and create their own food and oxygen. Fungi cannot create their own food because they do not have chlorophyll. So fungi have a symbiotic relationship with plants, where 15% of a plant's roots is fungi. And the fungi will absorb the inorganic material, such as sulfur or phosphorus, from the soil that the bacteria in the soil has been able to, fungi will absorb it from the rocks. And what they will do, well, they'll absorb from the bacteria too, but fungi will absorb it from the rocks and then they'll give it to the plants because plants need these minerals as their building blocks. So then they can produce food. And then plants will give food to the fungi. So they've got this beautiful friendship where they help each other out. And so now, over like millions and millions of years, you've got all this oxygen in your air, you've got oxygen in your waters, you're now creating plants and fungus and algae. And so eventually you've got water creatures forming that can eventually move to like land. And, you know, over zillions of years, you basically have the animal kingdom that you know now. Well, animals do not have chlorophyll, so they cannot create food. We are consumers. We depend on the bacteria, the plants, the fungi, the algae to actually help us to digest our food and do our job. So humans have developed a symbiotic relationship with microorganisms. We are 3 times bugs than any other human cell. These bugs are predominantly bacteria, but also viruses, fungus, and proteins. They're our friends. They're not our enemy. We must discount the germ theory of disease because we currently believe bugs are our enemy, but we are more bugs. For example, 38 trillion microorganisms live in our small and large intestines. 1 trillion live on our skin. There are microorganisms in every tissue and body cavity inside a human being and all animals. 30 trillion cells are red blood cells, which take all of the nutrients that the bacteria can then make available when they digest the food. And then the oxygen you inhale, and they create a lot of energy. The remainder of the human cells, like your skin cells, your heart, your lung cells, your white blood cells, they're like a small percentage relative to this huge ecosystem inside of our body. These bugs are so important. They help us to actually take the foods we eat, break them down into its molecules, and help us build the building blocks for our cell functions. They are 80% of our immune system. They protect our skin and help it to heal. They are the major connection between our gut to our brain to tell our brain everything's really good down here. No, we're in really big trouble. Our current belief system that all these chemicals that are produced in our brain, like serotonin and norepinephrine, 90% of them are all in the gut. The gut's microorganisms really are our life force. At this moment, I want you to watch a video that actually helps you understand a little bit about what I'm talking about.
What is the human microbiome? Though we don't often think about it, we're actually more non-human than human. Trillions of microscopic organisms, or microbes, call the human body home. Organisms such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, and even microscopic animals live all over our body, on our skin, and even inside us. These tiny organisms make up our microbiota, and most of them, about 95%, live in our gastrointestinal tract, more commonly known as our gut. And the combination of microbes, their genes, the environment they live in, and the stuff they produce is called the human microbiome. We've actually known for a long time that the human body is teeming with microscopic organisms. Dutch scientist Antonie van Leeuwenhoek observed bacteria scrapings from his mouth way back in 1683. But it's only relatively recently that we've begun to study the relationship between our microbiome and our health. And while the research is still in its infancy, the microbiome has been linked to everything from obesity, asthma, and allergies to autoimmune disorders such as rheumatoid arthritis and diabetes. The microbiome also influences how our brain functions and is linked to conditions such as depression, anxiety, and stress. These links explain why there is now an emphasis on creating or maintaining a healthy gut. And a healthy human gut consists of several thousand types of bacteria, as well as other microbes, though some types will be more common than others. The exact composition of a person's microbiota is unique, and it's constantly changing. It depends on what you eat, where you live, who you live with, what you touch, and even how you were born. Before we are born, we have very little, if any, microbes inside us. Microbes really start to colonize our bodies the moment we are born. The way we are born, either naturally or by cesarean, influences the type of microbes we first contact, and hence the type of microbes that will first colonize our bodies. Babies born naturally come into contact with microbes found in the mother's intestinal and vaginal fluid, whereas in a cesarean birth, babies tend to be colonized by microbes typically found on the skin and in hospitals. Similarly, breastfed babies will have a different microbiota profile than formula-fed babies. From the day we are born, our microbiome evolves quickly and reaches maturity during the first 2 to 5 years. After that, it stabilizes, resembling that of an adult. As adults, changes to our microbiota are likely to be small, but major shifts in composition can occur when we radically change our diet or take antibiotics, which kill bacteria. Significant life stages such as puberty, pregnancy, and menopause also cause large changes to our microbiome. And as we get older, our microbiome ages too, and the number of microbe species decreases. Since most microbes are in our colon, or large intestine, what we eat feeds our microbiota. And what a healthy microbiota needs are fiber-rich, complex carbohydrates. Simple sugars found in refined carbohydrates tend to be absorbed quickly and don't reach the colon for the microorganisms to feast on. But complex carbohydrates can't be digested in the small intestine and make their way into the colon, where bacteria breaks them down through fermentation, enabling us to use nutrients we couldn't otherwise. And the microbiota provides essential vitamins that we can't make ourselves, such as B vitamins. Perhaps most important of all, the microbiota helps our immune system develop, effectively training it to distinguish between good microbes and bad pathogens that cause disease. This symbiotic relationship between humans and the trillions of microscopic organisms that live on and within us has evolved over thousands of years, and we couldn't survive without the many specialized functions they provide.
So as you see, we're really made up of a balance of good and bad bugs. They all are really important in the purpose they serve. So it's kind of like you got good guys and bad guys. You need both because it's a checks and balances, right? And so what happens is if one set gets out of control, then who's going to come in and regulate the system? Well, you've got viruses. A virus is called a bacteriophage, which basically means virus is specifically designed for a specific bacteria, and a phage is to gobble up that bacteria and kill it. So what a virus does, it says, hey, there's too many of this bad bug. So it just comes along and it says, I'm going to gobble you up to keep the whole system in check. And so it keeps gobbling it up. Now, if the virus is gobbling too many of the bacteria, then the white blood cells signal, hey, we got a problem. So what the white blood cells do is they create antibodies. So they say, I'm going to create an antibody specific to this virus. And so next time, virus, that you're coming around gobbling up these bacterial cells, we're going to get rid of you. So your immune system's white blood cells says, we're going to gobble up the viruses. And so it's a really good system that keeps everything in check. Because viruses itself, they're really useless without actually the bacteria, right? Because they can't create their own food. They don't have any enzymes to break anything down. They are designed to help this checks and balance system, and it's worked really well. And so the problem here is if your bad bugs keeps getting fed and your good bugs aren't able to really do their thing. So what happens then is we've now got a situation in today's world, not just with our excess antibiotic exposures, but also, as you saw in the video, the global rate of C-sections also continues to rise. When a child is born by C-section, they are not colonized with a really healthy microbiome right at birth. And oftentimes these babies are formula fed instead of breastfed. So by the time they reach their maturity for their immune system between the ages of 2 to 5, they actually have a pretty imbalanced microbiome. And if they have a diet that helps support an unhealthy microbiome, these children are more likely to have eczema, allergies, asthma, learning disorders like autism, dyslexia, mood issues. And these children often may end up getting lots of infections where they get even more antibiotics. So as they get older, their problems become bigger they're more susceptible to infections. They're more susceptible to more chronic issues. And so if you look at this map, there is possibly a correlation between the countries that first really got hit with the coronavirus epidemic and possibly the high rates of C-sections and formula feeding babies, such as in China, certain parts of Europe, such as in Italy, to Iran, Egypt, Australia, Brazil, the United States. These countries were one of the first countries to really be hit with this pandemic. There must be some affiliation because countries, such as most of them on the continent of Africa, have been hit much later. One of the other things we've learned about the coronavirus COVID-19 is that through SARS, we learned that yes, it can stay on inanimate objects for even up to 5 days or more. And it does relatively well in temperatures of 22 to 25 degrees Celsius and a humidity of 40 to 50%, which is basically like air-conditioned environments that you would see in these winter months in China, United States. But what isn't similar to SARS, or maybe, is that it takes longer for the virus to survive in really hot, humid climates. So that's why it didn't really spread extensively to Malaysia, Indonesia in SARS case. But in COVID-19, I'm not sure if that's really true because Australia, that has been really hit hard, is actually in its peak summer season. So COVID-19 may actually be able to resist heat and be able to live in these hot and humid climates where it has impacted India early on, which is very hot and humid. So this virus strain is actually probably more virulent, more dangerous than even the SARS. And that's how it's been extensively spreading throughout the world. What we can learn, though, is how our diets and our drugs are destroying our gut microbiome and its function. This is what we can dramatically change to strengthen our immune system. So when a person has their ham, pork, turkey, chicken, cheese, eggs, to their ice cream, their sweet desserts like their cookies, cakes, bread, pastry, to their burgers, fries, or their morning cup of coffee, and alcohol, maybe even their like cup of chai. The problem they face is that this is the food of those bad bugs. And those bad bugs keep saying, oh, I love you, please keep feeding me this. So you keep thinking, wow, I really gotta have that pizza and burger, or gotta have that cup of coffee. But those good bugs, they need that plant-based fiber, like the kale and the broccoli. You know, that's how they thrive. So they really don't get much of a voice. But the other thing we gotta think about is what drugs are killing our microbiome. We've already heard a lot about antibiotics, which kills both your good and bad bacteria, which basically really weakens your immune system. And depending on how immune compromised you are, the effect can last from 3 to 9 months, but in some people it can last for many years. Antibiotics have been very clearly affiliated with causing inflammatory bowel disease, such as Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. But we've actually seen that there may be affiliation long-term with even cancer development. The number 2 drug is PPIs, proton pump inhibitors. These are sold over the counter, and we now believe you can just take them like candy. But what proton pump inhibitors do is they decrease your stomach's ability to produce acid. So when you don't really have enough acid, you've lost this protective barrier where pathogens that typically, when they enter the mouth, should be destroyed by the hydrochloric acid in your stomach are no longer killed. And they get to get in through the rest of the digestive tract, start damaging those bacteria, and start then creating a systemic effect. Number 3 drugs are non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. such as aspirin, ibuprofen, brand name is called Motrin or Advil, Celebrex, indomethacin, naproxen, brand name Aleve, diclofenac. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories damage the gut lining and cause gut inflammation. So when this lining gets further damaged, the gut basically loses its tight junctions that prevent the things inside the gut to leak out. And it then triggers a systemic inflammatory reaction where the white blood cells out in the bloodstream see these toxins and pathogens coming in, and they try to attack them and get rid of them. But if that leakage, that intestinal permeability keeps increasing, then the white blood cells are constantly doing a ton of work, and that inflammation gets out of control. And it can present systemically as heart palpitations, elevated blood pressure, elevated blood sugar, to brain fog, mental issues, joint pains, back pain, and the list goes on. The number 4 microbiome destroying drug is oral contraceptives or hormone replacements, which often are taken by women as a birth control or through their menopause symptoms. Oral contraceptives cause malabsorption, where it's harder to absorb nutrients such as zinc, your B vitamins, many of your A vitamins, iron, magnesium. They actually have an extra estrogen dose in the pills, which actually is a beautiful environment for yeast candida to grow by up to 50%. The 5th drug is anti-cancer drugs. They are designed to kill rapidly growing cells. They also kill rapidly growing cells inside your gut. So when you kill these rapidly growing cells, you basically are killing the gut's function. You're killing the microbiome of your gut. So it really suppresses. Number 6 is steroids, such as prednisone and hydrocortisone, which suppress your. And 7 is antipsychotic drugs, which have actually been shown to really increase one's risk for metabolic syndrome because they disturb the gut bacterial species. So basically what you're seeing here is this leaky gut syndrome where the intestinal cells are getting damaged, all these medicines, stress, toxins, etc., are leaking out into the bloodstream. It triggers a systemic inflammation, autoimmunity, and even food tolerance. So now, what are we going to do with all this information? Well, when we go back in time, what we learned is, why did man actually, they historically could live for long lives and really didn't get plagued with a lot of diseases. And what we learned is that man was much more connected to the earth, and they understood plants. Realize that plants are their complete food, where the part of the plant that grows above ground basically has all of the minerals that they've absorbed from the soil, and they can convert them into protein, nucleic acid for DNA and RNA, lipids, enzymes, along with use it for cell transport, enzyme activation, and for osmosis. So they learned that the plant's got everything I need. It can build my protein, it can build my DNA and RNA, it can build the fat for my cell walls. It helps my cells actually do all of its job. And because plants are such powerful photosynthesizers, they produce more sugar than they use. So when you eat the plant part that grows above ground, you immediately get a lot of value, you get a lot of the sugar, all the things you need to create your energy. And the extra sugar is stored as starch and oil, which is underground typically. That's only reserved for like times when you need a massive burst of energy, but not to consume all the time. So what those early evolutionary humans had learned is that when you look at the food chain, you've got plants, herbivores, predators. And currently we believe that the humans are the top predator, possibly. Well, what we learned is that when you move up this food chain, you lose 90% of the energy. So for example, a plant has 100% available energy. So when you eat it, you get a lot of energy from the food. But when you consume a herbivore, such as a cow, a pig, a chicken, a deer, when you eat that, there's only 10% of energy available in the food. So you have to spend more energy trying to digest that food, and you get less value out of it. Then when you consume a predator, you have significantly little energy available. Predators are basically fish, birds, really big cats. So actually, if you just look at the economics of how much energy you want to spend in digesting food, humans lived early on. They needed to exert less energy to digest food, so they got a lot more value out of it. So what we actually see is that when you look at the teeth of a human, they look pretty similar to a herbivore, not an omnivore and not a carnivore. And when you actually look at the digestive system of a carnivore, it has a really short, large intestine versus a herbivore looks a lot like humans, where it has a really long, large intestine to help it actually digest that fiber in the large intestines. So we actually look more like the herbivores, like the cows and the pigs, than we do look like the wolf and the lion or the fish. And so basically the keys to how to stay well are, most importantly, exhale. Focus on deep, slow exhalations. It will support your parasympathetic nervous system to calm your mind down and to let your body trust you, to let go of that fear for a moment in order to actually just breathe. We need oxygen for our cells to thrive. Number 2 is fast. Starve bugs by drowning them with a lot of water. When you hydrate, and you don't focus on food as your big source of energy, your cells are happy, especially your microbiome. They basically need water and oxygen to do their job. So when you take a break and have longer periods of fasting, your body is going to start really waking up its immune system and doing the work to help you heal. 3 is eat real, whole, plant-based foods. They are your real life force. They take the oxygen from the sun. They create the energy you need. They have your minerals, your nutrients, your protein. They are our lifeblood. Number 4 is be around happy, healthy people. It's actually been shown that these individuals have a healthy microbiome. So if you catch their bugs, it is contagious. Number 5 is use immune boosting drugs, not the immune killers like the proton pump inhibitors, the aspirins, the ibuprofen, the steroids. Think about what's going to help your immune system, not what's going to hurt it. And so, as you see, here's a simple chart of really, here's all the massive amount of variety of foods that enjoy it with others. With immune boosters, we're going to show you some of my favorite immune boosters, drugs. So number 1 is move away from these disinfectant like hand cleaners that really have a lot of chemicals in them, and they actually are killing off all the bugs that are protecting you on your skin. They're not actually helping you not get sick. They're actually helping to increase you getting more pathogens from your skin. So some really safe plant-based soaps, oils that are amazing for keeping your immune healthy and keeping those pathogens in check are, for instance, Dr. Bronner's biodegradable cleaner, Sal Sud. This is amazing for cleaning any of your counters, your kitchen, your bathroom. I even use it when I do my laundry. I put an extra dash of this in to does extra cleaning of the clothes. You've got Dr. Bronner's Pure Castile soap. You can use this as your hand soap, as your liquid soap. You can use it to clean your body. It has been around for decades. It works so well, and it doesn't harm you with any chemicals. It comes from plants. Baking soda is honestly the old school way of cleaning. It's very effective. We actually developed a lot of our products from actually ingredients in baking soda for helping your oral mucosa, because pathogens come in when people breathe them, when you cough them. Well, you want to protect all the bugs in your mouth. Well, the baking soda version to help be your antiseptic for your mouth so that you are not getting in these big infections is EcoDense Daily Care Baking Powder Toothpaste. It works so well and it tastes really good. Then you can use hydrogen peroxide. It's an amazing form of actually killing bugs. This is where this is our original bleach instead of actual bleach. This is so much more effective. As a skin moisturizer, between using the Castile soap, which is oil-based, but you feel like it's a soap when you're in the shower. Afterwards, amazing moisturizer is coconut oil. It actually gives a beautiful layer to your skin to protect your skin, protect those microorganisms in your skin so that you actually don't get it seeping in, because it moisturizes so well that when your skin doesn't break, it actually helps the integrity of everything on the inside. Elderberry. Elderberry tea or elderberry syrup. If you use it, get it diluted. Elderberry has actually been well studied as an amazing antiseptic, antiviral, antibacterial. And they actually did huge head-to-head studies with the influenza medicine Tamiflu, and they actually found that elderberry was so much more powerful in decreasing the rate of infection, and Tamiflu didn't even touch it. So it's an amazing prophylactic tea that you can drink in order to make sure you don't get sick, and if you're starting to feel any kind of cold symptoms, it works really well. If you want to actually take other drugs that actually really keeps boosting your immune system, I'd also recommend Innate, the supplement brand, and Flama Complete. It's a mix of turmeric, which is an amazing antiseptic, anti-inflammatory, with vitamin C, cranberry, which is a natural antibiotic, ginger, holy basil, the mint family, which is also a natural antibiotic, and black pepper. It works very well at keeping the inflammation under control, and keeping bugs under control. Now, to calm your nervous system now, because everyone's really scared. We can do all these good things, but you got to calm down if you want to take that positive action. If anything, that's probably the most important. I recommend Innate Neuroresponse, because what it does is it has a combination of ashwagandha, a root that's been around for thousands of years and used to not only support the endocrine system, which is predominantly in your microbiome, but also your immune system. So it's a mix of ashwagandha, bacopa, holy basil, and L-theanine. These are a beautiful synergy of plant-based ingredients, which actually calms your nervous system down and helps you exhale. So again, these are just a few of my tips for helping you feel much more empowered, that this is not an epidemic that's just happened. We together can help strengthen our immune system and not be scared. We can change the course so we don't see this happening again and again. We can not only heal, but also help heal our loved ones. Thank you. At this time, we can take questions that anyone may have, and I think to do that, you just need to type it in the chat section so that I can directly respond to any questions others may have.
Dr. Bandari, I have one question here in our chat. I'm going to read it. Hasn't corona and the other viruses you mentioned been started in the Chinese wet markets by wild animals like bats and snakes as opposed to beef, pork, etc., i.e. animals that have had no contact with antibiotics?
Actually, I think that there's actually a limited amount of the wild animals, and what they actually found was it was predominantly in all of the meats and the fish. It's like, I think that there is this belief that Chinese people are eating all these exotic animals, but actually predominantly that they actually found that when they originally thought, oh, is it from the bats? They actually found that no, the reserve of the virus was actually in a lot of the actual the meats that were already there, not in all the wild animals. The wild animals are certainly a source, but it's actually the way that it's spreading is not everybody there that we're getting infected is not people who just purchased those wild animals. They're literally people who are being exposed to the zoonotic virus, because zoonotic virus is what coronavirus is. It only can live in animal tissue and predominantly in people who also consume animal tissue. So this is a false information because it makes us all then believe, well, that's not relevant to the rest of the world. But in reality, they actually found that the source of the zoonotic virus, which can travel from the animals, it can go into all of the meats and the fish and the other items that are being sold. And this zoonotic virus, actually, they're finding is not just like contained in one area. It actually may be possible that we're seeing these different types of antibiotic resistant viruses throughout the world.
Okay, thank you very much. Here's another question. Is it best to go vegan?
Well, I think it is definitely preferable at this time to really shift towards a plant-based diet. I think one, because you are going to get all of what you need from a plant. The myth about protein predominantly coming in from animal sources, eventually animals get their protein from the plants they eat, not from eating other animals. So their actual real building blocks are from plants. And when humans consume different animals, unfortunately, they don't actually get any protein that they can use. It actually has led to a big inflammatory reaction, and it's also caused their good bacteria to be really damaged from the animal-based foods. The plants actually is what feeds the good bacteria.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Is there any research that shows being plant-based prevents the contraction of the coronavirus?
Yes, because when you are plant-based, and again, that means a real foods plant-based diet. So it doesn't mean being plant-based and then you're eating a lot of processed foods and drinking tons of alcohol and coffee. But what it has shown is that when you have a real foods plant-based diet, because your microorganism is being better supported and you actually have a much stronger immune system, that the virus really is kept in check, because the virus only gets an environment to go out of control if there are too many bad bacteria. And basically when the system's out of check, yeah, the virus can cause harm. But actually when you're on a plant-based diet, it's actually been clearly shown to not allow the virus to actually have an environment to heavily replicate.
Thank you. Here's one more question. Regarding milk, what kind of milk would you recommend? Flax, almond, coconut, soy milk?
I would recommend all of those except for the soy milk. Because unfortunately soy is one of the biggest crops that is produced in the United States. It's genetically modified, so our microbiome does not really recognize it. as a safe grain at this point, and it is often sprayed heavily with pesticides. So it is better to use other forms of plant-based milk. In terms of coconut milk, use it more as a luxury item instead of using it all the time. In terms of rice milks, do remember that rice is oftentimes, it's genetically modified, so it's also not well recognized from our microbiome. I'm not telling you don't do these things. I wouldn't just tell you constantly go out and have tons of rice milk and tons of coconut milk. These are all great options. They're significantly better options than an animal-based milk. So if you had to pick between your list, I would definitely pick more of like the hemp milk and the flax versions. Those are seed-based versions that are definitely much more nourishing. They've got more omegas, good omegas in them than the coconut milks and the rice or soy-based milks.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question regarding milk. What plant-based milk would be most beneficial for babies, toddlers?
I would probably recommend the flax or the hemp milk, right? But remember, I mean, babies and toddlers, again, they need, I mean, if you're not at the point where you're giving breast milk, then you really want to, they still need a lot of veggies. So, I mean, water, like you can take veggies, make them into a green juice, you're going to get all of the nourishment they need. So the milks are, again, they serve a purpose, but I would not make it a mainstay.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Do you think seafood is safer than meat?
No. It's kind of like pretty simple. If you think your oceans in the world are really clean, then you may be able to answer that question. But unfortunately, our oceans are full of so many different heavy metals, from arsenic, mercury, to all of the plastics, the gasoline, the pesticides, the antibiotics. So our fish do not live in a bubble. They are all, from every size, are exposed to these toxins. And fish have actually been shown to be one of the biggest causes of really damaging our kidneys. And so they're just not what they used to be. And our bodies are exposed to so many different stressors in our environment, in our lifestyles, that there's not really much value from consuming a fish. A fish is also, as you look at that energy chart of food, it's a predator that eats other fish. So actually you get so little actual available energy. It may be more like 1% or less from a fish, but you have to spend so much energy actually digest the food that just for, the purpose of how much energy you want to exert to break something down, you get little value out of it, but you get a lot of garbage from it. So I would say no, actually, I wouldn't say that's better.
Okay, thank you. We still have a couple of questions coming in. If one of your patients tests positive, what would you recommend? Is it too late or drastic to make changes at that time?
It is never too late to make change. I think the biggest thing is irrelevant if you test positive or negative. What you're going to hear from your medical community is just quarantine, right? Isolation. And then we are scared. We're scared when we don't know what we have, when we do get the results, we're just scared. And when you're scared, you've lost this faith. And I think the biggest thing is just pause at that moment. Close your eyes and breathe. Take those slow nasal exhalations. Let your body trust you. The minute it has faith in you, that's hope. And hope is the game changer. So it's never too late. As long as you believe, your cells, your body truly takes amazing care of us. We unfortunately don't always take good care of our bodies. So as long as you start to shift your mind, shift your attitude, and know you have the power to change this course, you will get better. But you gotta You got to shift and remove the fear. It's not going to help you. It's only going to hurt you.
Thank you. How can we trust the plants we are eating not to be influenced by foreign chemicals?
Well, nothing is perfect. It's like we're not all perfect, but they're still so much better than what else is out there. When you eat the things that man has made, you know, we took all of the value out of the food and we just put a bunch of marketing labels on it and we sold you an idea that this is healthy. When you eat the things that come from the earth has been really, it has the knowledge. So yes, there's exposures of different pollutants that we put on the earth, but our body can still receive it so much better than things that it's completely unfamiliar to. The body does not receive animal products safely to help us thrive for the long haul. The body does not receive all the processed foods that we now consume. The body does not receive when we overcook our food and we kill all of its value. So just if you start making that step and you connect with your food, you actually get involved in putting it together and really experiencing the eating experience, you're doing a big part of the healing. It's not just what you have, it's how you experience it. That's a big part of all of this. So I would just take that first step, because making that shift is really the game changer.
Thank you. Another question. Could leaky gut totally heal, and how long does it take if done properly?
Leaky gut can heal. You know, your cells can regenerate every 90 days. So it really depends on the severity of the case. I mean, there are people who it can take them 9 months, it can take them, you know, a year. It's very case dependent because there are so many factors. And as you saw in the leaky gut syndrome chart, it can be from stress, your medications, your food, other toxins. But the reality is that you got to start with your mindset. Because remember, the gut is a big controller to your brain. So if you're freaking out, then you're telling the brain to shallow breathe. Because when you're think, what's happening is you're actually taking shallower breaths. And inhalation triggers the sympathetic nervous system, so the fight or flight. When you close your eyes, your brain can hopefully shut down for a second. You can exhale. That stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, so your blood is better oxygenated. So there is more blood going to your gut, and that actually helps the gut function properly.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like you are against the current quarantine in place in San Francisco. Is that the case?
I think that when you tell people to basically be completely isolated, I think that we've got to really think about it, because they're saying, well, you're gonna, I'm not telling you don't do that. If you're not feeling good, right, I get it. And I think that when people don't have this information, and we're actually not telling people the actual sources of it and how it's spreading all over the world, well, we're gonna keep doing the same thing, right? Because we're gonna say, oh, well, we nipped this like 6 months from now, or whatever the time frame is, and then life can go back and people just keep doing whatever you're doing. But we can then continue to be negligent, and we can continue to keep shopping the same way we're shopping. And we're not addressing the root causes that we each, by changing what we as consumers are buying. Then when the demand is not so high, things change. You don't have an environment for all these pathogens to go out of control. You don't have an environment where you're supporting massive antibiotic production in your farm animals. So do I think that the socialization is totally wrong? No, I think that in some ways there's a silver lining of opportunity, that there's a stillness where cities are quiet, people are outside. There is some good. It's giving us a chance to contemplate, you know, things that we might have been aware of, but we just don't have the bandwidth to think about it. So there is something good, but I do think that I would say if you know happy people that are healthy, they're good. Bugs are good for us. So get outside, and people are smiling and they are joyful, and get away from constantly looking at your news and the TVs because they make us all scared. So we do need to experience some life. So yes, I don't think that we should completely like quarantine us if we're well, but I think we have to be cautious and respectful of others. So there is some good in all of this, but I don't think that using a bunch of hand sanitizers with a bunch of chemicals and Clorox bleach is actually helpful. I think that will cause more harm than help. So I think use products that do the kind of cleaning that is restorative.
Thank you. One more. In case someone is diagnosed with coronavirus but doesn't have health insurance, would you recommend home remedies as first option? If so, what?
Well, even if you go to the medical systems or you don't, really, it's kind of like you're positive. Are you sick? Because typically the assumption is that yes, you're symptomatic. Well, when you're sick, you need to rest, right? And typically common sense is if you're really sick, we're not going around and spreading all our germs to other people. We really are staying in bed. We're drinking a lot of water. Don't eat really, right? You probably won't even have much of an appetite. You need to starve the bugs. So if you starve the bugs, you rest your mind, you get a lot of sleep, a lot of healing can finally happen. I mean, and so that is a sense of quarantining, is giving your self a chance to be. So yes, if you test positive, the assumption is that you are fairly symptomatic and you don't feel really good. But even the hospital systems, they're basically telling people to quarantine themselves, right? If you're sick, because there's no actual, you don't give an antibiotic for this. You definitely don't want to do that. There's no magic pharmaceutical pill. This virus will mutate. By the time they develop a vaccine, it's already changed course. So it's not really that useful. And so the best thing to do is if you don't feel really good, then hydrate, starve the bugs, take a chill pill, get a lot of sleep, try to find a way to be happy.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Bandari. There are no more questions. Thank you, everybody, for really good questions. Before we end, I just wanted to make a quick announcement. We hold these educational seminars every third Wednesday of every month. Our next seminar will be in April 15th. Our certified yoga therapist, Elaine Oyang, will be speaking about yoga tools for better sleep. It will also be streamed via Facebook, our Facebook page, and Zoom. For more information, please visit our website, sfadvanced.com, and to receive updates, please sign up for our newsletter. And I will post the link here for you. If you would like to sign up right now, you can just click on it. It's in the chat. And again, thanks very much, everybody, and be safe and healthy. Have a nice evening.
Okay. Good. What did I miss? I got this pre-made. I went to that place today. Hello. Hey.
I lowered my hand.
But I went and I got.